All right, welcome everyone. We trust you can see and hear us all. Apologies for the late start here. It is a pleasure to welcome Michael today. Michael, you can go ahead and start your presentation here, and I'll introduce you. Michael Wallace from the Washington State University Extension. He is an associate professor in youth and family programs. Michael served in the youth development arm of WSU Extension for 20 years. And 10 years ago, he attended a fringe program of 4-H called Rites of Passage, where he participated in his first and not last Wilderness Vision Fast. Michael, I'll let you share a little bit more about yourself. Go ahead and take it away.
Sure, thanks. So maybe I'll stop sharing for a second and just get back to the big screen here. Boop. Thank you for coming. I know that was a technically dry title, so people showing up, I appreciate it. I am Michael Wallace. I am a cisgender gay male. I basically present myself as the heteronormative community created me. So, I call that wiggling through privilege or something like that. And that's really what we're gonna talk about today is how we use social norms and how we use values in society and what we as a community can do to work with that. And one thing that I want to start with is a story for you, and hopefully you'll be able to share some stuff with each other in just a little bit as well. We're going to do some brainstorming. So there was this young gay man, and he was probably born in like the 60s, right around the time Martin Luther King was petitioning for a lot of change in the world for social justice. And so when this young man got to be about a teenager, that would be in the 80s, right? The fabulous Reagan years. Not too long after the DSM finally took homosexuality off of the categorizations of mental disorders, right? 1973 was when that happened. So that was in our lifetime. Before that, people who were gay were basically considered mentally ill to some extent. And to our disillusionment, I guess, a lot of transvestism and gender identity disorder is still classified in the DSM catalog of mental illnesses, and people who are transgender often have to be classified to pursue more change, right? So, or moving closer to who they want to be. So I think that there is still a long way to go there. So this teen, I got to get back to my story about the teenager. He was a young gay male, and he was in love with his best friend, and he needed to talk to somebody about that because it was frustrating to have those teenage emotions and not be able to talk to anybody. So he decided he was going to talk to his mother, but he had to couch the whole thing because he was still very much in the closet and very much not outed to anybody. He had to talk to his mother by changing the gender pronouns of his best friend to a female. So, this guy, when he got older, got really confused when he first got introduced to the idea of pronouns, because he was like, wait a minute, like pronouns was like an escape route. It wasn't a reality route. So I just give that to you as an example of how over time, our definitions, our reclaiming of words, our reinventing ourselves continually keeps us fresh and on our toes. And I think that's something that is quite fabulous. I would like to propose that, one of the pronouns that I would like to use today, rather than just he, him, and what I call myself, is the pronoun of we and us. And I really want to lean into we and us, because we and us are the ones that got to change things, right? Collectively speaking. So let's dive into this little presentation I have. And this is actually going to be a dialogue process. So I want to I'm going to give you a heads up about that. We'll hopefully break out and share a little bit and do some creative thinking together. So the title was dry, yes. And actually it started out normalizing gay socialization, and then I had to correct myself several times over. So please understand that as an old fart as I am currently trying to rebuild my own vocabulary every day. So part of my story of my frustration here is that I was writing an adolescent curriculum, and I needed to talk about how kids click and crowd and do all those things. And I found that language in this guy named Dexter Dunphy, who wrote back in 1963, which, mind you, was back when we were still in the DSM as a mental disorder. But he was basically describing how adolescents socialize. And the way it starts is in early adolescence, you have male and female, pretty much gender separated cliques, which is little groups of friends who are the same sex, befriending each other. And then, you know, as they get a little older, like maybe they go to high school, those two crowds, those two genders start looking at each other. And they're like, oh, look at those boys over there. Look at those girls over there. And then as they get a little older, maybe they're moving towards high school, they start to form what are termed heterosexual cliques, which is the boys and the girls start mixing a little bit more in larger groups. And then this weird thing happens where all of these boys and girls pair off, right? And so it becomes a crowd of a bunch of paired off people. And then once, you know, high school's over, the crowd that has done all that socializing influence and impact just kind of dissolves. You know, people get married and they go off and they disappear. I think a lot of us, you know, who are older, we we understand, like, you know, how our friends just kind of disappeared after they got married. But you know, the interesting thing about this was I pulled this up and I looked at it and I was like, yes, I saw that happening, but no, that was not what happened to me. So from that moment, I was like, okay, well, what was my socialization as an individual, you know, as a cisgender guy? How was I in or out of this process, which was, you know, this is how it is for the heteronormative community? And that got me thinking, all right, well, I want to know what what the LGBTQ norms and values are. I want to be able to communicate that, because this model, which was written, you know, before I was born, is still pretty much a standard model of like, this is what teenagers do. And it talks about the socialization of heterosexual people, which completely ignores, you know, the other 10% who are not. So in order to have a little dialogue about this, and I'll tell you where we're going in a second, I just want to throw out a few norms for us, or a few, sorry, terms for us to keep in mind while we dialogue. Socialization. This is the process where an individual learns to adjust to a group or society and behave in a manner approved of by that group or society. So in the larger society, most people are socialized to heteronormative behavior because of the way, you know, the way I act, cisgendered male, I am acting in a heterosexual or heteronormative aspect, right? Social norms are the perceived informal, mostly unwritten rules that define acceptable and appropriate actions within a given group or community, thus guiding human behavior. And they're usually enforced. Like, let me give you a horrible example. If the you know, if the social distancing rules of meeting people were that you shake hands from 3 feet away from each other, and then, you know, let go of hands. Just the other day, somebody shook my hand and held onto it for a really long time, and I was like, okay, a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. And you can imagine, like, you know, if somebody blew their nose on their hand before they shook it with you, they would totally be violating a social norm. So we have norms, and a lot of them are shared globally, across our whole society. And then some, though, are what we call secondary norms, or they come from secondary socialization. So our family is our primary socializer, probably our parents, the way we were brought up as children. That's primary socialization. The minute you go to school and you start experiencing other people and you start forming an identity, that's secondary socialization. And generally, what this Dunphy map is saying is that once people go off and make families and recreate, they basically just reinstill the same set of values on the next generation of kids, right? And I think that somewhere there's a whole other special thing that happens for LGBTQ people that isn't about disintegrating into the norms of society. Um, so values and norms, they're often paired up and matched with each other, right? Values are individual beliefs that motivate people to act one way or another. So a value is your value, but we can share values, and shared values are generally where people are predisposed to adopt the values that they are raised with. Okay, so generally people are predisposed to adopt the values that they're raised with. People also tend to believe that those values are right because they are the values of their particular culture. So again, this is sort of like going back to that Dunphy thing. People take the heteronormative shared values and move forward with them. It's like a form of privilege. People don't realize that there is some difficulty for people who are not in the majority to have to conform or to struggle against conforming with those values, those shared values. But it brings up bigger questions to me. And those questions are really, what are our shared values? And that's what I want you guys to dialogue about and come up with some great ideas. I want you to help me today find some answers to these questions. So we're going to do some dialogue, and I know that we've already covered ground rules, but since you're going to be talking to each other, I'll just want to reiterate them a little bit. We're going to let you go into a dialogue. It'll be small breakout rooms. Let people complete their thoughts. You don't have to raise your hand because there's probably not going to be that many of you in a room, but if there were a lot of you, then you would click the raise hand thing. Share the mic. Try to be concise. That always helps. If you can, share the experiences that inform your thoughts. Like I've told you a couple stories about how people's experiences feed into who they become. And I mean, like if we think about the young guy who had to tell his story to his parents through a switched pronoun, we're kind of talking about compartmentalization, right? And or some degree of self-denial. And we can look at it that way. We can look at it from the ouch point of view, or we could try to turn that and say, well, this is a person who's very adaptive and very innovative, and maybe that's a value that he shares with a whole lot of other LGBTQ people who have learned through the power of survival some pretty good qualities, some pretty good strengths that actually define the culture itself. So going into that conversation again, assume positive intent from everybody. I think saying ouch when somebody uses a word that you don't like is cool. They don't have to necessarily stop and unpack that with you, but at least they hear that they might have made an error of words. And then always, suggest alternatives rather than being corrective. And that's just how we turn a word. It's like, I don't use the word gay, I use the word LGBTQ, or I don't use this word, I use that word. And that helps people kind of go, yes, me too. And there we are, building a norm together, building a language together. We are in a learning space. And that's exactly what I'm proposing we do, is we do some thinking about our identity as a group. So it's okay to be uncomfortable. In fact, it's actually really good to be uncomfortable because that means we're learning something. Yay! And remember that our experience informs our perspective. Again, back to my little story about the guy with the pronouns. If you think about it, and that was explained, if somebody said, I don't like pronouns, you're like, well, you should like pronouns. And then they explain a story to you that makes you go, oh, that's an interesting turn. Well, the reason we do it this way is because we're just trying to reclaim some language that was lost. Still, knowing that people's perspectives can show us a lot about their own truth and where they're coming from, and that's great. And finally, if you're going to share with yourself about yourself to other people, I always use the Las Vegas phrase, know your limit and play within it. Just share with what you're comfortable sharing. You're not required to overshare or undershare, or just be where you want to be with these conversations. So let me check. Is that good with everybody? Can I get a thumbs up if these are all good agreements for you to go into talking about stuff? It's
Yeah,
most
and Michael, if it's okay with you and the rest of the room, I'm just going to stop our recording so that maybe we can have more comfortable
beautiful.
conversations.
Yes, lovely. I appreciate that.